So this whole new process is very new to me. And I was watching your videos, Brendan. They're very
Mhm.
helpful. But I guess I'm just kind of stuck. You did mention a method to use rather than using the STAR method. You could use something else when addressing the competency-based interview, questions from the interview. So can you, would you be able to like give an example, like a concrete example, and just like take it from there? Like, how would you answer that question, if that makes
Yeah,
sense?
sure, could do that. Yeah. So we use an alternative to star because I think star is just, yeah, I think it's popular because it spells a word. But I just don't think as a structure it's that good. So we came up with our own instead. All right, we can do that. Yeah, thanks, Alexandra. So the star method. Yeah. Where we went with this is that we years and years and years ago, when I first started helping people succeed in promotion boards, specialist interviews, I started researching what was out there and came across the STAR method and thought, yeah, it's simple. It sort of talks about this was the situation, as in, this was the task I was set. That's what normally people say. These were the actions I took, and this was the result. And I thought, well, if we're looking for police officers, we're actually looking for people who recognize problems and challenges. And as opposed to waiting to be tasked to do something, they're like self-starters. They do 120% without being asked to do so. So they identify a problem as opposed to being tasked to deal with it, which actually the police aren't really looking for that. They're looking for people who are capable of working with a problem or a challenge and then moving it to resolution. And it's complicated in policing because there's so many variables involved. There's lots of people, but that's what the constabulary is looking for: good decision makers who can actually solve problems. So for that reason, I thought, yeah, I don't really like that task bit. And then people said, yeah, but what if you set the task yourself? And I thought, well, no one talks like that. I mean, is there anyone in the Zoom room at the moment who says things like, so the task I'm going to set myself today, do any of you talk like that? No, I don't think anyone does. So I started thinking, well, that just doesn't sit very well with me. And it doesn't sound right. And it sounds very unnatural. So what would be better? Well, actually, if you've identified a problem or a challenge, and that's the thing that's often missing in people's answers, they talk about what they do at work. They don't actually talk about a specific problem. So we've got to have a specific problem. It's got to be specific. We can then talk about the impact of it. So if I didn't do anything with it, if I didn't get a grip of this, the impact would be. And we can talk about that impact from several different angles, which really, really deepens your answer in terms of the context. And then you can talk about what you aim to achieve. So the S is the same. The S of the SAARL model is the same. It's just a situation. But where it really changes is as opposed to talking about a task, we think about an aim. So how many of you wouldn't really balk or think there's anything unusual with either you or someone else saying, yeah, so what is aiming to achieve? Does that sound like, give me a thumbs up, does that sound like real human talk? Yeah, it does. So it's just like real human talk. What is aiming to achieve? So, and also it sits well with the national decision model because the national decision model talks about what you're aiming to achieve. So how many of you are familiar with the national decision model? Hands up if you're familiar with it. One of you, two of you, not enough. Come on. National decision model, key part of the code of ethics. So you should be all over that. You should really know that already, what the national decision model is. Anyway, I'm going off at a tangent. It's the police national decision model. So when you can talk about an aim, you can talk about then sort of options that you considered. And there's two options that you can just use straight out of the bag. Decided I'd consult someone else, or another option would be to give it to your boss, or the best option that you're always going to go for is I decided to approach this task myself and deal with it myself because, and then you talk about rationale. You all still with me? Give me a thumbs up if you're still with me. Any questions? Wobbly thumbs? No? Good, brilliant. So now we can go into the next part, which is the same as the STAR model. However, with the STAR model, the action part really isn't explained in a lot of depth. And it's one of the things that I think is missing a lot in interview answers. Well, I know it is because I've been doing this for 30 years. is people talk about what they did, but they don't talk about how they did it. So the amount of times I hear, and Alcione, you would have heard this on our webinars, because Alcione is part of our academy already. How is it, by the way, Alcione? Good? You're good? Yeah, awesome. Thank you. Alcione is part of it. When we actually practice, Alcione knows I'm looking for detail, because what a lot of people will say is things like, so I approached the person calmly and professionally, or I listened to the person empathetically, or I worked in a highly collaborative way, which produced, which was both efficient and effective, which produced a partnership and collaborative approach, which meant that we achieved all of our organizational aims. God, that sounded good, didn't it? But actually, it's completely meaningless because there's no substance behind it. You're just making a load of bold buzzword claims. And I know there's guidance out there that says use the buzzwords from the CVF, but no, just don't do it. I used to be the interviewer. And whenever people tried to buzzword me, I would, so for example, here's the competency and values framework. I'll just open it up at a random page. I opened it up at We Are Collaborative, and someone would say something like, so yeah, I treated the person with respect as an individual, and I did everything I could to address their specific needs and concerns. Sounds great. And I'd think, you're just trying to BS me. So I'd say to them, that sounded wonderful, that you treated them with respect and you wanted to address their specific needs and concerns. How did you do that? And at that point, their house of cards would crumble and collapse. So it's the how that's really important. If you're going to say a buzzwordy thing, back it up with the how. And Alcione knows this. I go into this in a lot of detail, don't I? Alcione on the webinars, I'm like, no, seriously, we need to get in more depth. Some of the webinars, Alcione might have witnessed it when I've done like the 7 levels of how. That's great that you did that. Yeah, but how did you do it? And they'll go, well, I blah, 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 blah. Yeah, but how did you do that? And sometimes we have to go 7 levels deep until we actually find the thing that's going to give them awesome marks. So we explore all of that, and that's the bulk of your answer, is the A part of SAARL. Result: don't believe everything that you read in the books out there that talks about how to be successful in whatever career, how to be successful at interviews, how to become a police officer. All of those books, all of that guidance will all talk to you about making sure that your answer is one where, sorry, the result was one where you're really successful. Especially at final interview, I wouldn't like those, because I'd be listening to people thinking, yeah, but I thought you said it was a challenging or difficult task, and it's the first time you'd approached this situation. If it was challenging and difficult, why was the result so awesome? And I'm not buying it. And I've done this on the webinars and the one-to-ones as well. I've challenged people and said, it didn't really go like that, did it? And they've gone, no, not really. It was harder than that, wasn't it? Yeah, it was. The person you're talking about actually kicked off a little bit and said something like, what the hell's it got to do with you? Yeah, they did. It was a lot more complex, wasn't it? Yes, it was. Right, we want to hear about that in the action phase. I want to hear about that complexity. So in the result, you can talk about how these things went to plan, but actually something else didn't. Something didn't go to plan. Why? Because people. So in all of your answers, you should be involving people, and your answers should be about things that took time, not just like one of my clients in a one-to-one the other day. She talked about something that took her about 3 minutes to deal with. You got to talk for 5 minutes. This was about something that took her about 3 or 4 minutes to deal with. Okay, she made a decision, but it just didn't have the depth and breadth that was needed, and it didn't have the working with other people. Now, you may be thinking, yeah, but the question was about decision making. Yeah, it doesn't matter. Involve other people, because policing is about other people. As soon as you put your kit on and you walk out the locker room, everything you do is about involving other people and working with other people. So the more you involve and weave other people into your answers, the better. And so, because it was so difficult and challenging, you can talk about the result, but also you can talk about something that didn't go to plan. And I know people have difficulty with this, but it normally just takes me a few minutes just to find the thing in the example that didn't go to plan. And then once we've got that, then we can talk about it. And then that goes straight into the learning part. So the learning part is where you're talking about what you do differently. This is not I learned that it's good to ask open questions. I learned the power of collaborative working. I learned that it's good to listen to people. That's not learning. That's all just statements of fact. Real learning is when you can reflect on the thing that didn't go to plan. And when you reflect on the thing that didn't go to plan, then you can say, you know, having reflected on this, and I actually talked about this with my manager as well. We discussed this, and what I realized was Jim not turning up for this particular project and not being involved was nothing to do with Jim not being bothered or just couldn't, you know, didn't prioritize it. It had, when I reflected on it, I realized that I gave all my instructions to Jim via email, expecting that he was going to read it and understand it. And the fact is, he didn't understand what the task was. So in the future, what I'd do differently is I'd make sure I'd send the email and then a quick phone call, or I'd go to his office and just sit down with him and check that he understands what the project is all about, what his brief is, and what he needs to do to be part of it. Which one do you think works best? First one, I learned the power of open questions. I learned that it's good to collaborate with others. Or the second one, you've identified something that's different. First one, second one. Zoe's saying second one. Well, go on, let's put it to the vote. Number two, second one. Yeah, wins every day, doesn't it? Yeah, wins every day. Now, that's enough for the online assessment center. Online assessment center, we're just looking for structure, detail, make sure you answer the question. So as an example, we take ownership. That's one of the guides we use for the online assessment center. Series of questions. The top one is the one that we think is most likely because it's been the same question for the past 4 years. But in We Take Ownership, it talks about a time when you've managed a difficult task or problem under pressure. So we've got to make sure that we actually are really clear about what the difficult task was and why you were under pressure. It's like little points to prove. So we've got to make sure we include those things in our answers. And that's about the answering the question bit. So online assessment center, structure, detail, make sure you answer the question. So for example, another example, difficult decision type questions. We've had people in the past who've got all the way to the point where, you know, they've done the 5 minutes and it sounds really good, it's all structured, but they've not actually mentioned the words difficult decision. They've not actually articulated where or what the difficult decision was. Make sense, folks? All right, for final interview, we're looking for something else. We're looking for structure, we're looking for detail, we're looking for authenticity, as in you being quite open about things that didn't go to plan, things that went wrong, your own failings, emotional connect. So the whole thing was difficult or challenging, so that must have been emotionally draining for you or draining for others. Talk about how you handled your emotions, other people's emotions. And the last one, the fifth one, make sure you answer the question. So are you with me so far? Yeah. All right. Aaron's saying interview 5 minutes to answer each question. Yep, that's about right. And that model works really well because it hybridizes questions. So this is where the STAR method, the advocate, Aaron, coming to your questions, may not be the best thing for you. Because if they ask you a question which is, how in the future will you do? You can't answer it with a STAR format. It's a forward-facing question and it requires a completely different model. The HRSAARL, I'm not going to go into it in any depth, but HRSAARLKU hybridizes a rear-facing question, so there's an element of forward-facing in it. And it also hybridizes forward-facing questions because it puts an element of rear-facing in it. Anyway, I'm not going to go into any more detail about that because it's a bit more complicated and this is not a promotion workshop. This is just for recruitment. So the KU is where you sort of forward pace things. It's not a forward-facing question, answer for a forward-facing question, but you forward pace it. And the KU stands for knowledge and understanding. This is where you talk about your role as a police officer, and it really nails it in terms of your final interview, puts the icing on the cake for you. So for a question around, actually I talked about that, taking ownership, and a lot of that involves problem solving with others. managing a difficult task or problem under pressure. You talk about how you supported other people, helped other people, recognized the problem, worked it through, worked with other people to solve that problem. At the end of it, I talk about some of the learning, and then I forward pace myself and say, and the reason actually why this is so important in policing is because often I'll have challenges such as, and then list off some of the challenges. And then one that particularly springs to mind is a challenge that's particularly springing to mind, and one that's actually relevant to that police force. And I'm going to have to be able to deal with those things. And I'm going to have to make decisions and solve problems quite quickly sometimes because of the pressured situation I'm going to be in. So an example of that would be, so one of the things I'd like to think I'll be able to do as a police officer in the future is to be able to focus on these things by doing, and then talk about something that you do. So you're forward pacing yourself into the role that you're going to be in. And you don't need to do that for the online assessment center. There's just not enough time in the 5 minutes. But for a final interview, I would look to integrate that. It makes it a really strong, powerful answer. Trust me on this, it does. Because the feedback we've had from clients is that they really liked it. They've never heard anyone use that approach before. We've even had one client who said the interviewer asked them, what was that interview answer model you used? Because it was really good. I've got my promotion board coming up soon, and actually, so this was at the end of the interview when he'd already been told you'd passed. And she was really interested in this actual model. It works so well. It works so well. So, Aaron, does that answer the question for you? Yeah, awesome.